Some of you may have noticed over the past few weeks that there's noticeably been a certain subgenre of horror absent in my videos, that of course being the most popular one on the internet at this very moment, analog horror. This may be somewhat surprising to a lot of you, as I had spent so much time building my community around it that this sudden switch up may seem completely out of place. But in all honesty, I do have a good reasoning behind it, as I really was struggling with finding anything good and new to say about a lot of the new series. See, analog horror has become cumbersome due to the overusage of the Uncanny Valley, lack of innovative original ideas, and the creepypastafication of the medium. These things together honestly made a lot of the newer series unreviewable and a chore to sit through on many occasions. And I do not say that lightly, as I know horror usually has issues with these things online, but analog horror has begun to exemplify these things to the greatest degree more than ever recently. This is especially tiresome for me, as analog horror was once one of the leading ways for new horror creators to get their stuff out there. Hell, Kane Pixels is even making a Backrooms movie with A24 now, which is just insane to me. That's because while analog horror may not be fully dead, it's very obviously exhausted, and unless we see some more new risks, we're going to see a collapse like we've seen time and time again. I truly want to see analog horror and horror in general succeed, as it's a breeding ground of new, fresh ideas for young creators, but when I see this time and time again, it makes my job that much harder. Which leads into my first point, that of course being So before getting into this section, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe to the channel. I upload once per week and I cover anything horror related. If you have anything you would like me to cover, let me know in the comments down below, as well as your overall thoughts on the video and whether you agree or disagree. Okay, now let's continue. So while I've already made a whole video on this subject before, this idea within analog horror has only seemingly gotten worse with time. For those who don't know, the Uncanny Valley is a fear we humans have where people that look like us but look slightly off trigger a fear response in our brain. Many forms of media use this to great effect, and honestly, I have no issue with the usage of this fear in your story. But what I do have issues with is the way that analog horror does it, which is just using stretched out faces. And while in my original video I found that it was difficult to call this a cliche, I really cannot say that anymore. And this has been a staple of the subgenre from the very beginning, and while it was an interesting concept at first, with series like the Mandela Catalog and Gemini Home Entertainment using it to a quite disturbing effect, by the time a series like Basewood County came out, I found my enjoyment of it to become increasingly low. This is doubly annoying because of the lack of variety of scare types within the medium in the first place, as there are so many other ways that you can frighten your audience. So the overusage of this one singular scare type makes the content much less effective, as it makes many of the series that use it come across as one-trick ponies. And to reiterate, not every single series is guilty of this, as many of them are able to use the Uncanny Valley in a new and interesting way. Take Dr. Nowhere's work for example, as while I generally find a lot of their writing to be somewhat lackluster, I find their usage of the Uncanny Valley to be somewhat new and intriguing. Same with series like The Oldest View and Midwest Angelica, which while they use the Uncanny Valley by presenting their monsters as humanoid-like entities, both do interesting twists on the idea and don't just slap a stretched out face on an IP character. Vita Carnus is another example of this, as they take the Uncanny Valley and distorts it to an extreme degree, as we are able to recognize these things as humanoids with some human-like features, but besides that they are in something entirely different. But when I see series that use this trope time and time again, paired with extremely poor writing, it just gets tiresome for me to deal with in all honesty, as it was taking a toll on my love for making these review videos. And each time I check back, it still seems to be going on, with the original takes like Dr. Nowhere now also being beaten to death with series like Obelisk, which took the monster design of Dr. Nowhere and paired it with ARG-like storytelling. That's not to say I entirely dislike this type of storytelling, as occasionally I've seen some that do work, if not partially. Hell, despite Obelisk being part of the issue, I can see the appeal in it more than a lot of the other series that have been spewed on my feed constantly. But combining that with the fact that I'm desensitized to it at this point due to it being used repeatedly, it really has made covering these series much more of a chore rather than just a fun thing for me to do. This is a symptom of a bigger issue though, that of course being Many of these series have been lacking innovation for a while now, and when they do innovate, it generally seems to be for the worst of the subgenre as a whole. This is because once a new innovative idea is found by the masses, like the backrooms for example, it gets dragged through the mud to the point where it becomes unwatchable at the tail end of things. And this is nothing new. Hollywood itself does this on many occasions, such as the found footage boom of the 2000s and the 50s remakes of the 1980s. But generally by most audiences, this is seen as a negative thing for good reason, as while the original generally will still be appreciated and well liked, none of the derivatives will be anywhere near as good or interesting. And here's the thing about analog horror that's making it even worse than before, which is while in what I call the first wave, many of the series were still pushing for new and original ideas, the second wave's pioneers are already derivative of the ones from the first wave. So we're essentially getting derivatives of the other derivatives now, with each new wave bringing less and less to the table. That of course doesn't mean that there won't be anything new or creative, but it's giving the subgenre a bad look overall from an outsider's perspective. And while I understand many people may be finding out about these tropes for the first time, as they might have found out about analog horror from these newer videos, for people who have been watching since the beginning, these videos have begun to become tiresome. I first began to notice it around the era of the mimic trope, where every single analog horror was trying to be Mandela Catalog or Gemini Home Entertainment, with series like Basewood County doing much less interesting spins on them. It just got so monotonous to sit through that after I saw this beginning to happen with the fairy tale ones after the already painful Big Bad Wolf, I really could not stomach having to review another wave of badly written clones. And the Little Red Riding Hood one exemplifies one of the other main issues with original ideas, which is the borrowing of art styles. I don't want to point fingers and call it tracing, because it might not be, but the characters in this look suspiciously like Stewie Griffin, and then the inspiration from the Walton Files, which now every single series seems to be doing, is just so boring for me to sit through. I understand most of the people creating these know what their audience is, that of course being children, but should we really be showing them the same stories over and over again? This is why I think series like White Stag Education are so interesting, as while it uses the analog horror stylings that we all know, it takes a much different approach with its visual storytelling and the plotline itself. Rather than just being a collection of tropes like a lot of the modern analog horror has begun to be, it takes much more from short films before them, going for a more show don't tell style that's not super common within the medium. This is the exception rather than the rule, as I keep seeing the same storytelling devices, and it's gotten to the point where I rarely finish them after seeing the same tropes. Then there's the final nail in the coffin for originality to me, that of course being the over-reliance on AI, which trust me, I really don't want to get into a heated discussion on this because I don't know enough about the subject, but when I see these series that are done entirely with AI, it comes across as lazy to me. Take Angel Engine, which while I'm sure there's some thought put into the writing and plot structure of the story, I still just cannot get past the usage of AI for most of the art. I cannot tell if AI was used for the writing, but when watching after seeing the AI images, it makes it so hard for me to review, as it will taint my mind when it comes to the creativity of the series. So while I'm sure there's some creative and engaging ideas in series like Angel Engine, I really cannot give it the full attention that I would need for a review when I see things like its over-reliance on AI. However, many of these things together really point to one major thing in my mind. Something I've talked about time and time again, but honestly, I think it's time I fully explained what I mean by this, which is of course, so while many of us fondly remember the days where creepypastas were the biggest thing for internet horror, most of the internet remembers it for one sole reason. That being the over-reliance on tropes and cliches to the point where every new story seemed to feature at least hyper-realistic or dead kids. Due to the overusage of cliches, many of these stories were extremely predictable, with many of them being the exact same plot structures as the ones that were popular, such as the infamous garage sale cartridge with the haunted game, and then getting killed by the game character coming out into the real world. Poorly written stories became the norm, as many children flooded the wiki with bad Sancte XE clones and Jeff the Killer fanfics, and honestly the reputation it now has is quite funny, as many people seem to be looking back on these with rose-tinted glasses. Grammar errors galore plagued many of these stories, and it was quite obvious that many of these were written by people quite young, which while not a bad thing per se, it makes finding the good ones that much more difficult. Shock value also became extremely common, with dead kids and animals becoming the norms in nearly every story, to the point where many channels that covered them had running gags for people to make fun of them. Stories like the Tales Doll Curse became the norm, and if you haven't seen my video on this story, I would honestly check it out, as it exemplifies many of the points that I'm talking about to an extreme degree. I'll link it down below if you'd like to watch. And we are seeing the exact same thing happen once again, as many of these analog horror series have the exact same issues that these old creepypastas have. They also have a huge number of cliches, the stretched out faces, mimic tropes, the loud static when something disturbing pops up. It's genuinely getting quite tiresome to cover. Then there's the poor writing, with series like the Spider-Man analog horror having tons of grammar issues, poor plot structure, and convoluted storylines that go nowhere. Then there's the predictability with many of these series, with nearly all of them using similar plot structures to the ones in the first wave, with the structures of the Mandela catalog being extremely common, that being a PSA tape where some sort of spooky image is thrown into the mix with loud static. And as always, we've seen this all before. Finally, there's the over-reliance on shock value, just like in creepypastas, with series like Urban Spook using shock value as its only scare motivator, or 606 2006 mocking the death of the series creator in order to just get a few scares. I could keep going on and on about this, but I believe you guys get the point. I really don't want to be caught in the death spiral that analog horror seems to be going down, and honestly, it's pretty annoying to see this happen again right after it had already happened with creepypastas. You would think that we'd learn to not drag these ideas through the mud, but of course it happens again and again, and that's honestly why it's gotten so tiresome to review these, as many times it feels like I'm just shouting into the void as we aren't really seeing any real change. Analog horror is less mainstream than ever, with only a few series sticking with the style. It's a bit disappointing to see, and while I don't want to say this subgenre is fully dead, I honestly think it's on its last leg, so unless a major game changer is able to come out, I really don't see this going anywhere. So to end all of this off, I just really wanted to say that I want to really see analog horror improve, but many of these things are holding it down from keeping it the best it could possibly be. From the lack of innovative ideas, to the stretched out faces, to finally the creepypastafication of the medium, it seems like a downward spiral that we really cannot stop at this point. And it sucks to see, as this medium was a way for voices in horror that were normally unheard to be heard, but oh well, hopefully the next wave of online horror will learn from the last. But honestly, I hope analog horror the best, and I hope to be able to cover it again sometime soon. However, as of right now, I really do not find many of these new ideas that interesting, but hey, some of you may agree, some may disagree. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think, and also, did you guys like the video? Let me know as well, and if you did, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I upload horror content once a week, and this has been ABA Short Films, and I'll see you all next week.